The scorching sun beat down on Rebecca Morgan's bare feet as she ran through the golden wheat fields, her lungs burning and her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. Behind her, the smoke from her family's burning farmhouse billowed into the clear Arizona sky, a dark blot against the endless blue. She dared not look back, not even once, for fear that Harrison's men would be gaining on her, their revolvers drawn and ready. The year was 1878, and Williams, Arizona, was no place for a woman alone. Rebecca had known that since her father died 3 months prior, leaving her to manage the struggling farm with only the help of their aging farmhand, Elijah. But she had been making do until Harrison Thornton decided her land would complete his empire. Her dress snagged on a bramble, tearing the already worn fabric. She stumbled but pushed forward, ignoring the sharp stones cutting into her feet and the tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her heart stutter with fear. They were coming for her. The wheat parted ahead of her, and suddenly there he was, a tall figure astride a magnificent chestnut stallion. His face was shadowed by the wide brim of his hat, but she could see the determined set of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed as he took in her desperate state. She froze, uncertain whether this stranger represented salvation or further danger. Without a word, the cowboy extended a calloused hand. Rebecca hesitated only for a heartbeat before the sound of pursuit grew louder. She grabbed his hand, and in one fluid motion he lifted her onto his horse, settling her in front of him. His arm wrapped around her waist, strong and secure, as he kicked the horse into motion. "Hold tight," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel. It was the first and only thing he said as they galloped away from her burning home and the men who sought to claim it. Rebecca clutched the saddle horn, her body tense against the stranger's chest. She had no choice but to trust him, this man who had appeared like an apparition in her darkest moment. The wind whipped her long auburn hair, tears drying on her cheeks as they rode away from everything she had ever known. Alexander Nolan had not planned to be a hero that day. He had been tracking a herd of wild horses that roamed the territory west of Williams when he spotted the smoke. Curiosity more than altruism had drawn him closer, but when he saw the young woman running through the fields, terror evident in every line of her body, something instinctual took over. Now, with her trembling form pressed against him, he wondered what in tarnation he was supposed to do next. He was a solitary man by nature and by choice, having left behind the comforts of civilization after the war. The last thing he needed was to involve himself in whatever trouble surrounded this woman. But it was too late for second thoughts. He could feel the rapid rise and fall of her breathing, smell the smoke that clung to her hair, and sense the fear that radiated from her like heat from desert rocks. He guided his horse, Thunder, toward the small cabin he had built in a hidden canyon, far from prying eyes. "Where are you taking me?" Her voice was soft but surprisingly steady. She twisted slightly to look up at him, and Alexander found himself staring into eyes the color of summer sage. "Somewhere safe," he replied, keeping his gaze fixed ahead. "Those men aren't following anymore, but they might still be looking. My place isn't far." Rebecca nodded, too exhausted to argue. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the fields was fading, leaving her body aching and her mind foggy. She leaned back against the cowboy's solid chest, allowing herself, just for a moment, to feel protected. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the landscape changing from open fields to rocky terrain, then into a narrow pass between towering red rock formations. The canyon that opened before them was like something from a painting, a small Eden with a clear stream running through its center and cottonwood trees offering patches of blessed shade. Alexander's cabin was simple but sturdy, built with his own hands from pine logs and stone. A small corral stood nearby, currently empty except for a dappled gray mare that nickered a greeting as they approached. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Rebecca down. Her legs buckled beneath her when her feet touched the ground, and he caught her easily, supporting her weight as if she were no more substantial than a child. "I apologize," she said, steadying herself against him. "I seem to have used up all my strength." "No need for apologies," Alexander replied, guiding her toward the cabin. "You've been through hell today from the looks of things." Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow bed occupied another, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat in the center. Alexander helped Rebecca to one of the chairs, then moved to the water barrel in the corner, dipping a ladle and bringing it to her lips. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin and onto her soot-stained dress. When she had quenched her thirst, she looked up at him with clearer eyes. "My name is Rebecca Morgan," she said, "and I believe you just saved my life, Mr. Nolan, Alexander Nolan." He moved away from her, uncomfortable with gratitude. What happened back there? Who were those men? Rebecca's fingers twisted in the torn fabric of her skirt. "Harrison Thornton and his men. He's been buying up all the land around Williams to expand his cattle operation. My father refused to sell before he died, and I've been holding out since. Today, Harrison came with an offer I couldn't refuse, as he put it." Her voice hardened. "When I did refuse, he decided to take matters into his own hands." Alexander's jaw tightened. He had heard of Thornton, a ruthless cattle baron who had come west after making his fortune in railroads back east. Men like that believed the law was whatever they said it was. "They burned your home." "Yes," Rebecca's voice cracked on the word. "Elijah, our farmhand, tried to stop them. They shot him. I ran when they set the fire. I had nowhere else to go." Alexander moved to the fireplace, stoking the banked embers and adding kindling. The small room didn't need the heat, but the familiar motions gave him something to do besides look at the lost, battered woman at his table. "You're welcome to stay here tonight," he said, keeping his back to her. "Tomorrow, I can take you into town. Sheriff Bennett is a good man. He'll help you file a complaint." Rebecca laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Sheriff Bennett is in Thornton's pocket, just like the judge and half the businessmen in Williams. There will be no justice from that quarter." Alexander turned to face her, studying her more carefully. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was a strength in her face, a determination in the set of her jaw that reminded him of the wild mustangs he occasionally managed to catch and break. "Beaten down but not broken." "Then what will you do?" he asked. Rebecca looked around the cabin, then back at him. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I had was in that house, my father's savings, my mother's few pieces of jewelry, all our documentation. Even if I wanted to prove the land was mine, I have nothing to show for it now." Alexander nodded, understanding the gravity of her situation. "You need to rest," he said. "Take the bed, I'll sleep by the fire." Rebecca started to protest, but exhaustion won out. "Thank you, Mr. Nolan, for everything." He helped her to the narrow bed, noticing for the first time the cuts and bruises on her bare feet. Without a word, he fetched a basin of water and a clean cloth, kneeling to tend to her injuries. Rebecca watched in silence as this strange, taciturn man gently cleaned each cut, his large hands surprisingly deft. There was something in his methodical care that brought tears to her eyes again, not from pain, but from the simple human kindness that she had thought burned away with her home. "You should get some sleep," Alexander said, rising and taking the basin away. "We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Rebecca nodded, sinking back onto the thin mattress. Despite the day's horrors and the strangeness of her situation, she felt oddly safe in this isolated cabin with a man she had just met. Perhaps it was simply exhaustion, or perhaps it was something in Alexander Nolan's steady gaze that told her she could trust him. As she drifted towards sleep, she heard him move quietly around the cabin, the soft sounds of a man preparing for night in a place that was wholly his own. The last thing she remembered was the gentle weight of a blanket being drawn over her shoulders. The nightmare came just before dawn, flames and screams and Harrison Thornton's cold, calculating eyes as he gave the order to burn her home. Rebecca woke with a strangled cry, sitting bolt upright in the unfamiliar bed. "Easy," came Alexander's voice from nearby. He was already up, stoking the fire. "You're safe." Rebecca pushed tangled hair from her face, reality slowly filtering back. "I'm sorry if I woke you." "I was already awake," he said, rising from his crouch by the fireplace. "Do you want coffee? It's not fancy, but it's hot." She nodded gratefully, and he poured a mug from the pot hanging over the fire. Rebecca accepted it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "Your feet look better this morning," Alexander commented, nodding toward her bare feet, which poked out from beneath the blanket. Rebecca wiggled her toes experimentally. They were still sore, but the cuts had closed overnight. "Thank you for tending to them." Alexander shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. He moved to a trunk in the corner, rummaging through it before pulling out a pair of worn but clean socks. "These will be too big, but they're better than nothing if you need to walk around." Rebecca accepted the socks with a small smile. "You're very kind, Mr. Nolan." "Alexander," he corrected, "and it's not kindness, just common decency." "Well, there seems to be a shortage of that in these parts lately, so I'm grateful all the same." Alexander busied himself preparing a simple breakfast of corn cakes and dried venison, giving Rebecca privacy to pull on the oversized socks. He was not accustomed to having another person in his space, especially not a woman. It made him acutely aware of the cabin's limitations and his own. They ate in silence, Rebecca savoring every bite. It had been a long time since someone else had cooked for her, even something as basic as this meal. "What will you do now?" Alexander asked finally, setting down his fork. Rebecca stared into her coffee as if the dark liquid might hold answers. "I have an aunt in California," she said slowly. "My mother's sister. We haven't been in touch for years, not since my mother died, but she might take me in until I can find work." "California's a long way." "Yes." Rebecca looked up at him. "But I have nothing left here, and Harrison Thornton isn't the type to leave loose ends. He knows I could testify against him if I stayed." Alexander considered this. "The stage to Flagstaff leaves Williams twice a week. From there, you could connect to the western routes." "I don't have money for a stage ticket," Rebecca admitted, "or anything else for that matter." Alexander stood, taking his plate to the wash basin. "I can help with that," he said, his back to her. "I don't have much use for money out here, but I've saved a bit from selling horses to the army." Rebecca's pride wanted to refuse, but practicality won out. "I would pay you back," she said. "Once I'm settled, I would find a way." Alexander turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Let's get you to town first," he said. "We can sort out the rest later." Rebecca nodded, suddenly realizing she was still wearing her torn, smoke-damaged dress from yesterday. "I hate to ask for more, but do you have something I could wear? This dress is rather conspicuous." Alexander's eyes widened slightly as he took in her disheveled appearance. "I have some spare clothes," he said after a moment. "Nothing suitable for a lady, but they'll cover you well enough for the ride to town." He retrieved a faded blue work shirt and a pair of trousers from his sparse wardrobe, handing them to her with obvious discomfort. "I'll wait outside while you change," he said, moving toward the door. "Thank you, Alexander," Rebecca said, clutching the borrowed clothes. Alone in the cabin, Rebecca quickly changed, rolling up the pant legs and sleeves to accommodate her smaller frame. She used a piece of rope Alexander had left as a belt, cinching the trousers at her waist. The clothes smelled of sunshine and pine, and something uniquely masculine that she assumed was Alexander himself. When she emerged from the cabin, Alexander was saddling Thunder and the gray mare. He glanced up at her approach, his expression changing almost imperceptibly as he took in her transformation. "You look." He trailed off, apparently unable to find the right word. "Ridiculous," Rebecca supplied with a small smile. "Different," he settled on, "but not ridiculous. More practical for riding, anyway." He helped her mount the gray mare, showing her how to adjust the stirrups for her shorter legs. "This is Willow," he said, patting the horse's neck. "She's gentle, but she has spirit." "Like most females worth knowing," Rebecca said, earning a rare smile from Alexander. They set off toward Williams, taking a roundabout route that would keep them away from Rebecca's former property. Alexander rode slightly ahead, alert for any sign of danger. Rebecca watched him, noting the way he sat his horse as if they were a single entity, the easy confidence in his posture despite his obvious wariness. "Have you lived out here long?" she asked when they paused to water the horses at a small creek. Alexander leaned against a boulder, hat tipped back to reveal more of his face in the sunlight. His features were strong and weathered, with a scar running along his jawline that disappeared into the short beard he wore. 5 years, he answered. "Before that, I drifted around after the war, working cattle drives mostly." "The war?" Rebecca asked, though she knew which one he meant. She had been just a child when it ended. "I fought for the Union," Alexander said, his tone making it clear he didn't care to elaborate. "Came west afterward, like a lot of men who found they didn't fit back home anymore." Rebecca nodded, understanding there were wounds that went deeper than the scar on his face. Her father had never spoken of his time in the war either, except in nightmares that had him shouting in his sleep. "And you?" Alexander asked, surprising her. "Have you always lived in Williams?" "No," Rebecca replied, grateful for the chance to think about something other than her current troubles. "My family moved here from Missouri when I was 14. My father thought there would be more opportunities in the Arizona Territory." "Was there?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. "For a time, yes. We had a good little farm, not large but productive. My mother planted an orchard that was just starting to bear real fruit when she took sick 3 years ago." She paused, memories washing over her. "After she died, my father lost his spirit for it. He kept going through the motions, but his heart wasn't in it anymore." Alexander nodded, and something in his expression told Rebecca he understood that kind of loss all too well. "We should keep moving," he said after a moment. "It's still a few hours to town." As they approached Williams, Rebecca felt anxiety building in her chest. The town had been her home for 8 years, but now it represented danger. She pulled the brim of the hat Alexander had lent her lower over her face. Williams was a growing settlement, owing much of its recent expansion to the cattle industry and the promise of the railroad, which was slowly making its way westward. The main street was busy with afternoon activity wagons loaded with supplies, cowboys lounging outside the saloon, women in proper dresses moving between the general store and the milliner's shop. Alexander led them to a modest building at the edge of town with a weathered sign proclaiming it Widow Carson's boarding house. He dismounted and helped Rebecca down, then tied both horses to the hitching post. "Martha Carson is a good woman," he explained quietly. "She doesn't ask too many questions, and she's no friend of Harrison Thornton. You'll be safe here while we figure out your next step." Rebecca nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. Yesterday morning, she had woken in her own bed in the home where she had lived for years. Now she was essentially a fugitive, dressed in a man's clothes, dependent on the kindness of a stranger. Alexander seemed to sense her distress. "One step at a time," he said, his voice gentler than she had yet heard it. The widow Carson turned out to be a stout, no-nonsense woman with shrewd eyes and a surprisingly warm smile. She took one look at Rebecca in her borrowed clothes and ushered her inside without a word, leaving Alexander to wait in the small front parlor. "Any friend of Alexander Nolan's is welcome here," Martha said, leading Rebecca to a small but clean bedroom at the back of the house. "Though he's never brought a lady friend before." The older woman's eyes twinkled with curiosity. "It's not like that," Rebecca hastened to explain. "Mr. Nolan helped me out of a difficult situation. I've lost my home and I'm hoping to travel to California to find my aunt." Martha's expression sobered. "Harrison Thornton's work, I'd wager." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "That man's been burning folks out all over the county," Martha said grimly. "My late husband always said Thornton was the kind who'd set fire to heaven if he thought he could claim the ashes." She patted Rebecca's arm. "You rest here, dear. I'll bring up some hot water and find you something more suitable to wear." When Martha had gone, Rebecca sank onto the narrow bed, emotion finally catching up with her. She buried her face in her hands and allowed herself to cry for Elijah, for her lost home, for the sheer terror and exhaustion of the past 24 hours. A soft knock at the door made her hastily wipe her eyes. Alexander stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in his hands. "Mrs. Carson is bringing up water," he said. "I wanted to let you know I'm going to see about stage tickets to Flagstaff." Rebecca nodded, embarrassed that he had caught her crying. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all this." Alexander shook his head. "No need." He hesitated, then added, "I'll come back this evening to check on you. Try to rest until then." After a hot bath and a change into a simple dress borrowed from Martha's daughter-in-law, Rebecca felt more like herself. She sat in the small kitchen with Martha, gratefully accepting a cup of tea and a plate of freshly baked cornbread. "Alexander said you might be able to help me understand what's happening with Harrison Thornton," Rebecca said. "Why is he so determined to buy up all the land around Williams?" Martha settled her substantial frame into a chair across from Rebecca. "Railroad's coming," she said simply. "Not just any railroad, but the Atlantic and Pacific. They're pushing west from Albuquerque, and word is they'll be coming through this area within 2 years. Land that's worthless now will be worth a fortune then." Rebecca's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "That's why he was so insistent about buying our farm. It's not about expanding his cattle operation at all." "Oh, I expect he'll run cattle on it until the railroad comes," Martha said. "But Thornton's not a cattleman at heart. He's a speculator, and he's betting everything on the railroad." Rebecca felt a surge of anger. Her father had died not knowing the true value of their land, and now she had lost it all because of one man's greed. "Is there really nothing that can be done?" "No way to prove what he's doing." Martha's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "Sheriff Bennett won't cross him, and Judge Wilson is his brother-in-law. Unless you've got the money for lawyers in Flagstaff or Prescott, I don't see a way to fight it legally." Rebecca sighed, sipping her tea. "Then California it is." Martha studied her thoughtfully. "You know, Alexander Nolan doesn't involve himself with other folks' troubles. Never has in all the years I've known him. He comes to town for supplies every few months, sells a horse or two to the army, and disappears back to that canyon of his. For him to bring you here to help you like this." She left the sentence hanging meaningfully. Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. He's being kind, that's all. I was in danger and he happened to be there. Martha hummed noncommittally. Well, it's a good thing he was. Thornton's men aren't known for their gentle treatment of women who get in their way. A cold shiver ran down Rebecca's spine at the implication. Will they look for me here? They might, Martha admitted, but not right away. Thornton will assume you've left the area entirely or that you're hiding with friends. He doesn't know about your connection to Alexander, and few people do. Still, it would be wise to keep a low profile until you can leave. Rebecca nodded, grateful for the widow's straightforward advice. I'll stay in my room as much as possible. Alexander returned as the sun was setting, carrying a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Martha showed him to the kitchen, where Rebecca was helping prepare the evening meal. I've secured passage for you on tomorrow morning's stage to Flagstaff, he said without preamble. From there, you can connect to the western route in 2 days' time. So soon? The words slipped out before Rebecca could stop them. She hadn't expected to feel disappointed at the prospect of leaving. Alexander nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. It seemed best. The longer you stay in Williams, the more likely Thornton's men are to find you. Of course, Rebecca said quickly. You're right, thank you for arranging it. He held out the package. I took the liberty of getting you a few things for the journey. Nothing fancy, but practical items that might be useful. Rebecca unwrapped the bundle to find a sturdy pair of women's boots, a plain but well-made travel dress, a warm shawl, and a small reticule containing a surprising amount of money. Alexander, this is too much, she protested, trying to hand back the reticule. He shook his head firmly. California is a long way and stage travel is expensive. You'll need lodging along the way and food and who knows what else. I won't have you arriving at your aunt's doorstep penniless and desperate. But why? Rebecca asked, genuinely puzzled by his generosity. You barely know me. Alexander looked uncomfortable, but his gaze was steady. Because someone once helped me when I needed it most, he said simply. I'm just passing on the favor. Martha, who had been pretending not to listen while peeling potatoes, harumphed loudly. Why don't you stay for supper, Alexander? It's almost ready, and Rebecca could use the company, I'm sure. Alexander looked like he might refuse, but then he nodded. Thank you, Martha. I'd be pleased to stay. The meal was simple but hearty: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh biscuits. Rebecca found herself watching Alexander as he ate, noticing the careful way he handled the delicate china plates, the polite manner in which he complimented Martha's cooking. There was a gentleness beneath his rough exterior that intrigued her. After supper, Martha excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving Rebecca and Alexander alone in the small parlor. An awkward silence fell between them. Will you be all right, traveling alone? Alexander finally asked. Rebecca smoothed her borrowed skirt. I think so. I traveled from Missouri to Arizona with my parents, so I'm not entirely inexperienced, and women travel alone all the time these days. Still, it's a hard journey and you've been through a lot. I'll manage, Rebecca said with more confidence than she felt. I don't have much choice. Alexander leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What if there was another option? Something besides running to California or staying here to face Thornton? Rebecca's heart stuttered. What do you mean? I know a place north of here. Good land, unclaimed. It's remote, but there's water year-round and enough flat ground for a small farm. He spoke quickly, as if he'd been thinking about this for some time. It's near Apache territory, which is why no one's claimed it yet, but I have good relations with them. They leave me be, and I do the same. Are you suggesting I should homestead there? Rebecca asked, confused. Alexander's gaze was intense. I'm suggesting we could go there together. I know horses, you know farming. Between us, we could make something of it." Rebecca stared at him, stunned by what sounded remarkably like a proposal. "Alexander, we've known each other for a day." "I know," he admitted, "and I'm not asking for anything improper. We could build separate cabins to start, be neighbors, partners in the land." A flush crept up his neck. "And if, in time, you found you might want something more, well, that would be your choice entirely." Rebecca found herself speechless. This taciturn, solitary man was offering her a future not charity, not rescue, but partnership. It was unexpected and strangely appealing. "Why would you do this?" she asked softly. Alexander looked down at his hands. "I've been alone a long time," he said finally. "By choice, mostly. After the war, I couldn't stand to be around people. Too much noise, too many expectations. But these past 5 years I've been healing, I think. And yesterday when I saw you running through that field." He trailed off, searching for words. "What?" Rebecca prompted. "I saw someone who wouldn't give up no matter what was taken from her, someone with fire in her spirit." His eyes met hers. "I admire that. And I think we could help each other build something worth having." Rebecca's mind raced. The practical part of her knew this was madness to consider tying her future to a man she barely knew, to start over in untamed territory with nothing but determination and hard work. But another part of her, the part that had refused to sell her farm to Harrison Thornton even when it would have been easier, recognized a kindred spirit in Alexander Nolan. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to decide tonight," Alexander said quickly. "The stage ticket is bought and paid for. You can still go to California tomorrow if that's what you want. But if you're interested in another path, meet me at the livery stable at sunrise. We'll leave before anyone in town is awake to notice." He stood, reaching for his hat. "Either way, I wish you well, Rebecca Morgan. You're a brave woman and you deserve a good life." Rebecca walked him to the door, her mind still reeling from his proposal. "Good night, Alexander," she said, watching as he settled his hat on his head. "Good night," he replied softly. And then he was gone, striding down the darkened street toward the livery where he had arranged to stable the horses for the night. Rebecca closed the door and leaned against it, overwhelmed by the choice before her. California represented safety, civilization, the known path. Alexander's offer was wild and uncertain, but it also meant staying in Arizona territory, fighting back in her own way against men like Harrison Thornton, who thought they could take whatever they wanted. Martha found her still standing there minutes later. "Are you all right, dear?" the older woman asked. Rebecca looked up with a small smile. "Alexander asked me to go with him, to homestead some unclaimed land north of here." Martha's eyebrows rose, but she didn't look nearly as shocked as Rebecca had expected. "Did he now? And what did you say?" "I didn't give him an answer. He said I could decide by morning." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Alexander Nolan is a good man," she said. "Wounded in spirit, perhaps, but solid to his core. I've known him since he first came to these parts, and I've never known him to lie or break his word." "But we barely know each other," Rebecca protested. "Sometimes," Martha said with the wisdom of her years, "the heart recognizes what it needs before the mind can make sense of it. My Edward and I knew each other just 3 weeks before we married, and we had 42 good years together." Rebecca considered this. "What would you do if you were me?" Martha patted her arm. "I can't answer that for you, dear, but I will say this: California will still be there a year from now, or 5 years, or 10. But a chance to build something with someone who respects your strength, that doesn't come along every day." Rebecca slept fitfully that night, her dreams a confused jumble of burning farmhouses, stagecoaches, and Alexander Nolan's steady gaze. She woke before dawn, her decision made in that quiet space between sleep and wakefulness, where the heart's true desires often reveal themselves. She dressed quickly in the travel clothes Alexander had bought her, packed her few belongings, and wrote a note of thanks to Martha, along with a promise to send word when she was settled. Then, as the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky, she slipped out of the boarding house and made her way to the livery stable. Alexander was already there, saddling Thunder and Willow. He had his back to her, and for a moment Rebecca simply watched him work, admiring the economical grace of his movements. Then his head lifted as if he sensed her presence, and he turned. The smile that transformed his face made Rebecca's breath catch. It was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, unexpected and illuminating. "You came," he said simply. Rebecca nodded, suddenly shy. "I want to try," she said. "I can't promise anything beyond that, but I want to see this land you spoke of, to see if we can make something of it together." Alexander's smile deepened. "That's all I ask," he said, reaching for her pack. "A chance to try." He helped her mount Willow, then swung up onto Thunder's back. "It's a 3-day ride," he said. "Are you ready?" Rebecca looked back at Williams, at the town that had been her home but now held only painful memories. Then she turned to face north, toward the unknown territory and the man who had, in the space of 2 days, become her unlikely champion. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. They rode out as the town began to stir, taking a trail that skirted wide around Rebecca's former farm. Alexander set a steady pace, not too fast but relentless, putting miles between them and Williams with each passing hour. By midday, they had entered terrain Rebecca had never seen before, rugged canyons and pine forests that gave way to high desert plateaus. Alexander seemed to know every trail and water source, navigating with the confidence of a man who had explored this land thoroughly. When they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Rebecca found herself studying her companion openly. "How did you find this land you're taking me to?" she asked. Alexander passed her a canteen of water. "I was tracking a particularly stubborn Mustang stallion. He led me on a chase for nearly a week before I finally gave up and just followed him out of curiosity. He took me to this hidden valley where his herd was grazing. It was so peaceful, so untouched, that I nearly decided to stay right then." He smiled at the memory. "I've been back several times since, mapping it out, learning its secrets." "And you never claimed it officially?" Alexander shook his head. "I considered it, but the paperwork, the trips to the land office in Prescott, it all seemed too complicated for a man who prefers to live simply. But with 2 of us, it would be worth the effort." Rebecca nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying, that he had been content with his solitary existence until now, but something in him had changed when their paths crossed. "Tell me more about yourself," she said as they mounted up to continue their journey. "You know my story, but I know little of yours beyond your time in the war." Alexander was silent for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing his words. "I was born in Pennsylvania to a schoolteacher and his wife, had a normal upbringing as these things go. My father wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I was always more interested in the outdoors, in animals. When the war came, I enlisted right away, believing in the cause." He paused, and Rebecca waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "I was at Gettysburg," he continued quietly, "and Antietam before that. Saw things no man should see, did things that haunt me still. When it was over, I couldn't go home, couldn't face my parents or the quiet life my father had planned for me, so I headed west, working my way across the country, never staying anywhere long." "Until Williams," Rebecca supplied. "Until that canyon," Alexander corrected. "Williams is just where I go when I need supplies or human contact." The canyon became home because it was the first place since the war where the noise in my head quieted enough for me to hear myself think. Rebecca absorbed this, understanding better now his preference for solitude, his careful, measured interactions with others. And yet here you are, proposing to share that sanctuary with me. Alexander's gaze was steady. Here I am. The simple acknowledgement hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to put into words. They camped that night in a small clearing near a stream. Alexander built a fire and prepared a more substantial meal than their midday fare: beans, bacon, and coffee that tasted better than anything Rebecca could remember. As darkness fell, the vastness of the night sky opened above them, stars pricking the blackness like diamonds scattered on velvet. Rebecca leaned back on her bedroll, marveling at the spectacle. "I've never seen so many stars," she murmured. Alexander, sitting across the fire, looked up. "One of the benefits of being far from town," he said. "No lamps or fires to dim the view. Do you ever get lonely?" "Out in your canyon, I mean." The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Sometimes," he admitted after a moment. "Not for people exactly, but for connection. For someone who understands the beauty of a place like this." His eyes met hers across the dancing flames, and something unspoken passed between them: recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits drawn to the same wild freedom. The next 2 days passed in similar fashion: long hours of riding, brief stops to rest and eat, and nights beneath the stars. Rebecca found herself growing accustomed to the rhythm of the trail, to Alexander's quiet presence, to the way he always seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. By the 3rd day, the terrain had changed dramatically. They rode through towering ponderosa pines, crossed crystal-clear streams, and finally began to descend into a valley that took Rebecca's breath away. It was nestled between protective ridges, with a small river winding through its center. Meadows of grass rippled in the afternoon breeze, dotted with wildflowers in purple and gold. At the northern end, a natural spring bubbled up from rocky ground, creating a pool before flowing down to join the river. "This is it," Alexander said, raining thunder to a halt at the valley's edge. "What do you think?" Rebecca stared in wonder. After the harsh landscape they had traversed, this hidden paradise seemed almost unreal in its verdant beauty. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "How has no one claimed this before?" Alexander pointed to the ridges surrounding them. "Apache land begins just beyond those hills. Most settlers are too afraid to come this close to the boundary. But as I said, I've established a respectful relationship with the local band. They know me, and they tolerate my presence as long as I hunt only what I need and treat the land with respect." They rode down into the valley, and Alexander showed her the spot where he thought they might build. It was on slightly elevated ground near the spring, protected from the wind by a natural formation of rocks. "The soil here is good for growing," he explained, dismounting and helping Rebecca down from Willow. "And there's game in the forests, fish in the river. With hard work, we could be self-sufficient within a year." Rebecca walked a few paces away, taking in the land that could be her new home. It was wild and untamed, yes, but it was also beautiful and full of potential. She could envision a cabin nestled against those protective rocks, a garden plot where she could grow vegetables, perhaps even a small orchard like her mother had planted. "We would need to go to Prescott to file the homestead claim," she said, making her decision. "And we'd need supplies to get through until we can establish crops." Alexander's face broke into that rare, transformative smile. "Does that mean you're willing to try?" Rebecca turned to face him fully. "Yes," she said. "I think this place could become a home, our home, if we build it together." The days that followed were among the most challenging and rewarding of Rebecca's life. They made a temporary camp near the spring, using canvas Alexander had packed to create a crude shelter. During the day, they worked tirelessly gathering stones for the foundation of their cabin, felling trees for logs, clearing land for a small garden plot. Alexander proved to be a skilled builder, having constructed his canyon cabin entirely on his own. He taught Rebecca to use an axe properly, to notch logs so they would fit together snugly, to mix mud and grass for chinking to keep out the wind and rain. For her part, Rebecca applied her farming knowledge to planning their garden and identifying wild plants that could supplement their diet. She learned to track and hunt alongside Alexander, discovering an unexpected talent for moving silently through the forest. 2 weeks into their endeavor, with the cabin's walls beginning to take shape, Alexander announced it was time for a trip to Prescott to file their homestead claim and purchase much-needed supplies. "It's a 2-day ride each way," he explained as they sat by their evening fire. "We should both go since we're filing the claim jointly." Rebecca looked up from the rabbit stew she was stirring. "Jointly," Alexander nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. "I thought. That is, I assumed we would file as partners, equal shares in the land." Rebecca felt a rush of warmth at his obvious commitment to treating her as an equal. "Yes, of course," she said. "I just didn't expect it, given the usual way of things." "There's nothing usual about our situation," Alexander pointed out with a small smile. "And I've never put much stock in the way of things anyway." They set out for Prescott the following morning, leaving their half-built cabin and carefully planted garden plot with a mixture of pride and trepidation. Rebecca found herself eager to return before they had even left the valley, a sure sign that she was already thinking of it as home. Prescott was a bustling territorial capital, far larger and more developed than Williams. Rebecca felt oddly out of place among so many people after weeks in the wilderness, but she straightened her spine and followed Alexander confidently through the streets to the land office. The clerk who helped them file their claim raised his eyebrows at their unusual arrangement, but made no comment beyond the necessary questions about the land's location and their intentions for improvement. When he asked their relationship, Alexander answered smoothly, "Partners," without elaboration, and Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude for his discretion. With the preliminary paperwork, completed full ownership would be granted after 5 years of continuous residence and demonstrated improvements. They moved on to purchasing supplies. Alexander's cabin had been Spartan by necessity, but for their new home, they selected items with greater comfort in mind: proper bedding, cooking utensils, tools for farming and building, seeds for crops they couldn't gather in the wild. "We should get you some proper clothes as well," Alexander said as they loaded their purchases onto a pack horse they had bought for the purpose. "And perhaps some personal items." Rebecca had been making do with the travel dress and a spare shirt and trousers of Alexander's, modified to fit her smaller frame. The prospect of having her own clothing again was unexpectedly emotional. The general store offered a limited selection of ready-made dresses, but Rebecca found 2 that would serve for everyday wear, along with undergarments, a nightgown and sturdy work boots. Alexander discreetly stepped outside while she made these selections, returning only to pay when she was finished. Their last stop was a small restaurant where they treated themselves to a proper meal, their first since leaving Williams nearly a month earlier. Sitting across from Alexander at the checkered tablecloth, Rebecca was struck by how comfortable she felt in his company now, how easily they communicated with just a look or a gesture. "Penny for your thoughts," Alexander said, noticing her contemplative expression. Rebecca smiled. I was just thinking how strange life is. A month ago, I was desperate and alone, running for my life. Now I'm homesteading in a beautiful valley with a man I barely knew then but trust completely now. Do you regret it? Coming with me? Not for a moment, Rebecca said honestly. It's been hard work, and I know there are challenges ahead we can't even imagine yet, but I feel purposeful, alive in a way I haven't since before my father died. Alexander reached across the table, hesitating briefly before covering her hand with his. It was the first time he had touched her beyond the necessary assistance of trail life, and the warmth of his skin against hers sent a flutter through Rebecca's stomach. "I'm glad," he said simply, "and grateful you took a chance on a stranger with a wild proposal." Rebecca turned her hand beneath his, interlacing their fingers in a bold move that surprised even her. "Not such a stranger anymore," she said softly. The journey back to their valley was slower, laden as they were with supplies, but Rebecca found herself eagerly anticipating their return. When they crested the final ridge and the valley spread out below them, she felt a surge of emotion that could only be described as homecoming. The cabin walls had weathered slightly in their absence, but otherwise, all was as they had left it. Their garden shoots were pushing up through the soil, and the spring burbled merrily in the afternoon sunlight. It wasn't much yet, but it was theirs a beginning. With renewed energy, they threw themselves into completing the cabin. Alexander fashioned a proper door and shuttered windows, while Rebecca created a stone hearth and chimney under his guidance. They constructed a single large room at first, with plans to add more as time and resources allowed. As summer progressed into early fall, their hard work began to bear fruit literally. In the case of their garden, which produced a modest but welcome harvest of vegetables. Alexander built furniture, a table, chairs, a bed frame, while Rebecca sewed curtains and cushions from fabric purchased in Prescott. They developed a comfortable routine, each playing to their strengths but learning from the other as well. Alexander taught Rebecca to track game and set traps. She showed him how to preserve vegetables for the winter months ahead. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking late into the night, sometimes content in companionable silence. And through it all, something was growing between them, a connection deeper than partnership, warmer than friendship. Rebecca found herself watching Alexander when he wasn't looking, admiring the strength in his hands as he worked, the kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her, the rare but precious smile that transformed his serious face. For his part, Alexander became more comfortable with casual touch, a hand at the small of her back as they moved around the cabin, fingers brushing as they passed tools between them, a gentle squeeze of her shoulder in silent appreciation of a meal well prepared. They had been in the valley for nearly 3 months when the first snow fell earlier than expected and heavier. They had prepared well for winter, with a substantial stockpile of firewood, preserved food, and sturdy improvements to the cabin. But the sudden white blanket covering their valley was still a sobering reminder of nature's power. "We're well set," Alexander reassured her as they stood in the doorway, watching the snow accumulate. "And the cabin is sound. We'll be comfortable enough." Rebecca nodded, but a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran through her. Their valley was isolated in good weather. In snow, they would be truly cut off from the outside world until spring. Alexander noticed her disquiet. "Are you worried?" "A little," Rebecca admitted. "Not about provisions or shelter, but about being so completely alone out here. If something were to happen." "We have each other," Alexander said simply, as if that was all that mattered. And perhaps, Rebecca thought, it was. The snow continued for 3 days, eventually reaching nearly 2 feet in depth. When it finally stopped, the valley was transformed into a glittering wonderland. eerily silent except for the occasional crack of a snow-laden branch giving way. Confined to the cabin by necessity, Rebecca and Alexander found new rhythms to their days. He taught her to play checkers with a board he carved in pieces made from different colored stones. She read aloud from the few books they had brought from Prescott. They took turns telling stories from their childhoods, learning each other in new ways. On the fourth night after the snowfall, with the temperature dropping to bitter cold outside, they sat close to the fire, wrapped in blankets and sipping hot tea with honey. "I never thanked you properly," Rebecca said suddenly. Alexander looked up from the arrow he was fletching. "For what?" "For saving my life that day in the wheat field. For taking me in when I had nowhere else to go. For offering me a future when everything I had was taken away." Alexander set aside his work, his expression serious. "You don't need to thank me for any of that. What I did because it was right, not to earn your gratitude." "I know," Rebecca said softly. "That's part of why I—" She trailed off, suddenly unsure of how to express the feelings that had been growing within her. Alexander waited, his eyes never leaving her face. When she didn't continue, he asked gently, "Why you what, Rebecca?" She took a deep breath. "Why I've come to care for you, more than as a partner or a friend." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Alexander's expression changed subtly, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips. "Rebecca," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "I've cared for you since the moment I saw you running through that field, though I didn't understand it then. You were so fierce, so determined, even in your fear. I knew then that you were someone extraordinary." He moved closer to her on the bench they shared, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I've been alone a long time. By choice, yes, but also because I never met anyone who made me want to be otherwise. Until you." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. "I was so lost when we met. Everything I had was gone, and I didn't know who I was anymore without my family, without my home. But you really saw me when I was at my lowest, and you offered me not rescue but partnership, the chance to build something new together." Alexander reached out, tentatively brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. "I never expected to find someone like you," he said. "Someone who could understand the silence as well as the words, who could see beauty in this wild place, who could match my determination with her own." Rebecca leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. When she opened them again, Alexander was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Rebecca Morgan," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day, though it's taken me all this time to find the courage to say it." Joy bloomed in Rebecca's chest, warm and expansive. "Alexander Nolan," she replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you too, and I'm grateful every day that you found me when I needed you most." He leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then increasingly fervent as she responded with equal passion. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Rebecca felt as if she had finally, truly come home. When they broke apart, both breathless, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that months ago," he murmured. Rebecca laughed softly. "We had a cabin to build, a garden to plant, a life to start. Perhaps the timing is perfect just as it is." Alexander smiled, that rare, wonderful smile that transformed his entire face. "Perhaps it is," he agreed, before kissing her again, more deeply this time. That night, they moved Alexander's bedroll next to Rebecca's by the hearth, sleeping side by side for the first time, wrapped in each other's arms while the winter wind howled outside their snug cabin. The winter passed in a blur of short, bright days and long, intimate nights. They developed new traditions, Alexander reading aloud while Rebecca sewed by the fire. Impromptu dances to no music, but their own humming, chess games that often ended in playful arguments or passionate embraces. By the time the spring thaw began, they had become more than partners in land, more than lovers in the night. They had become essential to each other, two halves of a whole that neither had known was incomplete until they found each other. As the snow receded and the first green shoots appeared in their valley, Alexander grew increasingly thoughtful. Rebecca noticed his preoccupation one evening as they sat on the bench he had built outside their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "What's on your mind?" she asked, nudging him gently with her shoulder. "You've been elsewhere all day." Alexander took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," he said carefully. Rebecca felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. "What about it?" "It occurs to me that while it served us well in the beginning, it no longer reflects what we are to each other." He turned to face her fully. "Rebecca, I don't want to be just your partner in this land. I want to be your husband if you'll have me." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. They had exchanged words of love, had shared their bodies and their dreams, but neither had spoken of marriage until now. "Are you proposing to me, Alexander Nolan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small object. "I am," he said, opening his hand to reveal a ring, not a traditional gold band, but something more meaningful. A circle of silver with a small, perfect blue stone set into it. "I made it," he explained as Rebecca stared in wonder. "The silver is from a coin my father gave me before I left for the war. The stone I found in our river last week. It reminded me of your eyes in certain light." Tears welled in those eyes now as Rebecca looked from the ring to the man holding it. "It's beautiful," she said. "And yes, Alexander. Yes, I will be your wife." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her alone, and then he kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and a future built together. They were married 2 weeks later in Prescott, with the territorial judge officiating and Martha Carson, who had made the journey specially when she received their letter, as their only witness. Rebecca wore a new dress of pale blue, and Alexander surprised her with a proper suit for the occasion, looking so handsome and dignified that she scarcely recognized the rugged man she had come to love. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Nolan," she teased as they walked arm in arm from the courthouse. "Only for you, Mrs. Nolan," he replied, the new name making her heart skip a beat with its rightness. They spent 2 days in Prescott, enjoying the novelty of a proper hotel room and meals they didn't have to prepare themselves, before heading back to their valley, their home, with renewed purpose and shared dreams. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Their homestead flourished under their joint care, expanding to include a proper barn, a chicken coop, and eventually a second room added to their cabin when Rebecca discovered she was carrying their first child. William Alexander Nolan was born on a crisp autumn day in 1880, with the assistance of an Apache midwife who had become a friend to Rebecca during her pregnancy. Alexander paced outside the cabin during the labor, alternating between prayer and promises to any deity who might be listening that he would be the best father a child could have if only Rebecca and the baby came through safely. When the midwife finally called him in, he found Rebecca propped up on their bed, tired but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in the softest blanket they owned. "Come meet your son," she said, her voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. Alexander approached cautiously, as if the small creature might disappear if he moved too quickly. When Rebecca placed the infant in his arms, he stared down at the tiny face in awe. The baby had Rebecca's auburn hair but his own strong chin, a perfect blending of them both. "Hello, William," he whispered, a tear tracking unashamedly down his cheek. "Your mother and I have been waiting for you." As their son grew, so did their homestead. By the time William was walking, they had added a vegetable garden that produced enough to trade with neighboring settlements, a small herd of cattle, and an orchard that Rebecca planted in memory of her mother. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha, arrived 2 years after William, bringing a new kind of joy to their growing family. Alexander proved to be a devoted father, teaching William to ride and fish while still finding time to rock Elizabeth to sleep each night with lullabies his own mother had once sung to him. In 1883, they received unexpected news from Williams. Martha Carson wrote to inform them that Harrison Thornton had died suddenly of a heart attack, and much of his empire was being sold off to pay debts no one had known he had. The land that had once been Rebecca's family farm was among the properties being auctioned. "Do you want to try to buy it back?" Alexander asked as they sat on their porch, watching William and Elizabeth play in the yard. Rebecca considered the question seriously, looking out over the valley that had become more home to her than anywhere else had ever been. "No," she said finally. "That part of my life is closed. Everything I love is here now." Alexander squeezed her hand in understanding, and they watched the sunset together, grateful for the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. 5 years to the day after they filed their homestead claim, Alexander and Rebecca made the journey to Prescott to receive their final deed of ownership. The land was officially theirs, recognized by the territorial government, and secured for their children's future. As they rode back toward their valley, Rebecca thought about the terrified young woman she had been, running barefoot through a wheat field with nothing but the clothes on her back and no hope for tomorrow. How strange and wonderful that her lowest moment had led to her greatest happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Rebecca smiled at him, this man who had lifted her onto his horse without a word and changed the course of her life forever. "I was thinking that sometimes, when you're running away from something terrible, you're actually running towards something wonderful without even knowing it." Alexander's eyes crinkled at the corners in the way she loved. "I'm glad you ran in my direction," he said simply. "So am I," Rebecca replied, spurring her horse forward toward home, where their children waited, where their future beckoned, where love had built something stronger than any force that had tried to break them. And as they crested the final ridge and their valley spread out before them, golden in the afternoon light, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that this land, this life, this love was exactly where she was meant to be all along.